everyone. Welcome to this second last session of the day for cyber science. This talk is titled HSE and Cybersecurity in Remote Work and is presented by Lars Bodsberg from Sintef. So welcome, Lars. Thanks for joining us today. You should be able to share your screen and get started with your presentation when you're ready, and I'll be in the background just to moderate the Q&A at the end and in case you need anything.
Okay, does this look fine? Am I sharing now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay then, my name is Lars Bodsberg. I would like to present some results from a study we did on HSE and cybersecurity in remote work in the Norwegian petroleum sector. And this work was done with colleagues of mine, with Tor Olav Grøtan, Martin Gille Jåtun, and Irene Værø. The digitization and increased use of remote operation is a growing industry trend. And work that has previously had to be done physically on the facility, it can now be conducted from remote locations. However, these remote operations, they may lead to new vulnerabilities and risks. And in particular, a new challenge is this cyber attack. Yeah. So the presentation today I will first say more specific about the objective, our research method, main findings, recommendations, and further work. Yeah. The objective, the main objective was to gather knowledge on the extent of remote work in the Norwegian petroleum sector, and subsequently to explore important factors contributing to common situational awareness. Illustrated here that we have then personnel sitting onshore with direct access to the facility offshore. Yeah. And I should stress that the objective of the study was on functional safety and not information security. That is, our focus was how can you protect personnel, environment, and equipment on the installation, and not specifically information security and protection of information such as confidentiality. This figure illustrates the layout, the data flow for ICT systems used in the Norwegian petroleum sector typically today. The figure shows that the ICT systems, they are made up in layers, and typically you have this very low level. This is the physical equipment. It could be sensors, it could be valves, which actually control the factory. Yeah. And then you have the first level there, which is about the computers and the operating displays, then which actually then control the process. Yeah. And then upper, you have what we could call the management level. This is the level where the management would like to have some more information about the systems down here. We call them often the office system as well. So basically, they don't control any of this equipment. They just want to have some information from this type of equipment. So that's why we typically split the ICT systems into information technology, IT, and operational technology. Operational technology means then that you actually monitor industrial production and then control it, support it, whereas IT are those levels where you just handle data administratively. Yeah. And digitalization means that some of these methods now could also be in the cloud. What I would like to stress that there's two personal categories working remotely. Those are those sitting in the control room onshore these are physically monitoring and controlling the process. But then you have another group of people, those are the engineers. They can have direct access to the systems for monitoring the performance of the systems and to doing change. And the main objective of our study was to address the personnel working with the systems, not the control room operators. Another main factor to consider here is the difference between those people who want to have only read access. That is, they don't want or need to actually control the process. They just want to have information. And that is a big difference compared to those who then want to have write access. And by the term write access, we mean people who actually want and have a need to change parameters in the control system, these lower OT systems. So that has been the focus of our study, yeah. And a major challenge now is that if people can get access to the IT systems up here, for instance, a cyber attack, if you are not well protected with firewalls, a person can actually come from the cloud down here and all the way down to the control system. So that's why we need then very strict measures to prevent any attacks from the administrative system. Yeah. Our research approach, yeah, we started some work on digitalization several years ago, and we tried to figure out, given that we now will have increased digitalization, what will be the typical trends for remote work. So we made several reports where we came with some assumption about how would further work look like when implementing digitalization. And those reports were the baseline for our study. Yeah. And we did several then interviews as shown in this figure. We interviewed both offshore facilities, but also onshore petroleum facilities, as well as drilling organizations and companies. Yeah. And furthermore, we had interviews with vendors, suppliers to these onshore as well as offshore installations. Yeah. And we had informants from both managers, system administrators, as well as technical experts. Yeah. I obviously have a challenge here with some automatic time. I'm not sure how I can remove it. Yeah, I think I just have to go on, unfortunately. Did I, let's see, finish here? Yeah. So we have then both the manager from and technical specialist. Fortunately, we had very high competence specialists from the vendors with long time competence operating these type of control systems. Some main findings then from the informants related to both remote work and management consequences and common situational awareness. First, extent of remote work. The practice so far is that you distinguish very carefully between what we call control systems and safety system. And I would say that most of the companies still, even if you have the possibilities of remote access, if there are critical safety implication of any software update, you still do it on the location. Yeah. But you still take a lot of advantage that you can do a lot of testing onshore before you actually do it. Yeah. And we noticed that when we interview these field personnel, these informants, they are a bit reluctant and skeptic to increased use of remote work, especially from looking at this write access. Yeah. But there is, and they said that there is an increased pressure that more and more work and even changes in the software of critical systems should be done onshore. So this challenge is increasing. Yeah. Concerning remote work management, in order for personnel sitting onshore today to have access to a control system on offshore, there is a very strict management procedures. You both have technical solutions, but you also have people on the installations which actually give you access. So before anyone get access, they have to specify typically what is the topic of the work, what system is he going to work on, how long time will he work on the system, all of this. So as of today, there's a combination of several measures to prevent any unintentional access to these systems. Yeah, and it used to be some years ago there could be a common username password for remote work, but today this is also changed. So any person who wants to log on, he need to log on with his personal username password. So what are the HSE consequences for those involved in this work? Well, considering the people working on the offshore installation or the remote installations, this digitalization actually they feel increases complexity, and with increased complexity, they feel a bit more uncertain in their own work. The positive aspect of that is that due to remote access solutions, they feel that they get easier access to expert competence. So that is the positive aspect of it, yeah. And a lot of engineers, which then used to travel to these offshore installations with helicopters, they clearly say that it's very advantageous for those that they don't have to do these trips with helicopters anymore, and they could sit then locally on land, in their office on the land, and do this work on control systems on offshore. We noticed though that this competence doing any work on a control system, you need to know the context of the control system. So the informants we talked about working remotely, they appreciated very much any opportunity to locate and visit physically the installation. So in general, although they were happy that they avoided a lot of trips, they still wanted very much to have the opportunity to have some physical trips. And that is due to the specific knowledge you need for these particular installations you are working on. And that is about common situational awareness. I mean, when you work virtually in virtual teams, it is a big challenge how you establish a common situational awareness. And it was stressed very much during the interviews that you need this good local knowledge, especially because applications, they will never be fully standardized. And another point is that you need some increased focus on situational awareness, since less personnel than now will have the total view of the risk and work conducted when several of these personnel work remotely. Then some comments on cybersecurity. We asked them specifically about the challenges these personnel sees regarding cybersecurity any measures you could do to improve your ability to mitigate cybersecurity attacks. And one particular comment was that when you work from an office from onshore, make sure that your company has dedicated rooms and for doing this type of work. That will help concentration during this work. And you should also make sure that there are restrictive access control to these rooms the engineers are sitting in any office at onshore. Another point they stressed in regard to cybersecurity was that you should stress that all engineers have what we call clean PCs. That is, they bring their computers, which are the only are using for their professional work, and not have it logged on to any other application. That was a very clear recommendation. And then I think security and cybersecurity, this is kind of a new field. So several stress that we need to have more strict requirements on cybersecurity already in the contracts. So you don't just start discussing it after product delivery. During people which are working with traditional functional safety, they stress very much that you need to have a continuous focus on your safety barriers and then try to monitoring them continuously. And a lot of safety equipment like detectors, valves, they have some online diagnostics for measuring the performance. And they, several informants advocated the same principle for cybersecurity. You need to have more online monitoring and analyze of networks and connected systems to withstand this new threat of cyber attacks. Yeah, and likewise with the ongoing work with safety management and the focusing on compliance and daily compliance, you need also then to stress compliance with established security guidelines and work processes. Yeah. So I stress these are now not the conclusions by SINTEF, but this is just an overall summary of the main findings from these informants in the industry. Then there are some trend pictures. We started with some trend pictures. And our aim was to see these hypotheses we had several years ago, how well did they fit what we actually observed during these interviews. Yeah. And one main takeaways is this distinction between work process and work form, or you could maybe say a little bit more unprecise, work as planned versus work as done. I mean, distinguishing between all these formal written ways of doing the work and how it is actually done. I mean, these informal ways of people collaborating. We do think that needs to be carefully considered, even though we work now mainly in virtual teams. Yeah, but what you really should say then that you shouldn't just duplicate what we are doing in working physically. You need to be aware that virtual teams, they had some other ways of informal working than physical teams. I think that is the main takeaway from this study. Yeah, and we do think with this virtual digitalization, there will be more time spent on planning work and less time on completing the work. It requires more planning. We do think digitalization and the opportunities for remote work leads to more continuous change processes. As of today, doing a change in a safety system, so an offshore installation is a tedious process. You do a lot of time verifying the change and quality assured the change before you actually implement it on an installation. Yeah. With these new cyber attacks, you don't really have that long time to change your system, to modify it to withstand these attacks. So that means we are now entering into a more another type of working process, which much focusing on continuous adjustments and also adjustment on responsibilities. Another interesting point that we think now that we will have access to very large amounts of real-time data, but that may cause a new challenge, and we do think that access to expertise really can be scarcer than access to data when we're talking about remote work and remote operations. And then, of course, there is a very positive effect here, where you can have multiple teams that are independent of the individual organizational and geographical location as well. That is clearly a major benefit. Some continued comments on trend picture. We do think, and based on the informants, that this increased complexity and interactivity following this digitalization and the possibility for remote attacks, it makes it more difficult to manage crisis situations. Yeah, so that is something you really need to plan for and consider. Then, even if you have this access to more data and information, we do think that these personal relationships still are very important to deal with complexity. Then, in our early work, we introduced the term digital nomad. I mean, the fact that some personnel now, when they work remotely, can work on a lot of different installations. We do think that is an interesting aspect, but we did not really find any conclusions regarding to what is the main benefit effect of this digital nomad. One challenge we have noticed, though, and which the informant also considered, was that if you, as an engineer, are sitting in an office onshore, and you are working, so to say, in parallel, and do work on 2 or 3 installations at the same time, if something happens, you are more likely to do some error failures and maybe misunderstand some information and think of, oh, that is really something that happened on one installation I'm working on, and forget that that is not maybe as relevant for this particular incident you're now handling. Yeah. So this, I think, is a particular challenge that you need to be extra careful for. We also notice, and according to informants, they stress the situational awareness, and I think everybody in this field, they are very sure that this is a challenge we need to work continuously on, how to get common situational awareness in multi teams. Yeah, as a major trend here is, as everything becomes more dynamic, we do think that this resilience concept, which has been developing the later years, particularly within traditional safety, is also a very fruitful concept, and we are presently working very much on the term cyber resilience, which we think is some kind of a capacity to be very adaptive. And I think that is a very important characteristics when you're going to deal with the new type of threats like cyber attacks in a remote operation. To sum up then, our main recommendations to the industry based on this study are, we do think this access control management and user-friendly administration procedures for authorized personnel are essential. In particular, the point that any security safety measure, it must be user-friendly, otherwise people have a tendency to looking for ways of omitting this safety measure. We do think that since there's opportunity now for more collaboration between operator companies and vendor suppliers, we do think that you should have particular focus on how you can collaborate better and make some kind of options for doing this physically as well. We do think physical meetings is still very important, even if you are talking about virtual teams. And then we think these companies which then have offices on shore and working remotely, they should carefully design both the physical location of the room as well as the more environmental conditions, working environment in the room. And you need to look carefully at the shift schemes and also as well as access control. These rooms should really be with restricted access if you're going to have access onshore to the offshore controls. And then we also had a very technical comment, and that is the use of data diodes. That is basically a physical device which makes data flow to flow only one way. So in particular then, if you have users who really only need read access, you could implement that by implementing data diodes and thereby preventing inadvertent access to some of your system. Some further work. We asked 3 questions we think is very important. How to combine the safety and security management of ICS, industrial control system, also addressing the cultural differences between the IT and OT disciplines. For example, if you have a challenge in an IT system, you may easily just stop your IT system. That philosophy is not very practical if you have an online system. So there are some basic differences in an online system, OT system and IT system, which may cause some challenges, and they also use some different wording. So there are also some wording challenges when we are going to have collaboration between IT experts and OT experts. And then we do think you need to carefully set some limits to the technical complexity we are introducing here. And then to focus very much on how you can balance cyber security requirements, work processes, and operational safety. And the last question is how to manage the unexpected situation during incident management, including what we do think is important, not only addressing and take lessons learned from what goes wrong, but increasingly take advantage of lessons from what has been a successful handling of a deviation. Yeah, and And then due to this continuous change processes and the dynamics of this type of work, we do think that this very formal procedures for working with cybersecurity should be limited. You need to really have more open opportunities for handling these unforeseen events. So this concludes my talk today.
All right, thank you very much, Lars. There are some questions in the Q&A, but unfortunately we're running out of time, and so we need to avoid delays on the next session. So I would defer this discussion to the forum that is available on the member area of the website, the conference website. So please feel free to keep the discussion going on that platform. So